Most believe that wealth is a harvest of sweat, yet they ignore the silence of those who possess it without strain. You've been told that time is a currency of achievement, but time is merely a witness to a much deeper, invisible arrangement. Effort without the correct internal signature is nothing more than a loud confession of scarcity, a frantic motion that ensures the very lack it seeks to escape. There is a subtle, persistent friction that has likely governed every major attempt you made to alter your circumstances. It is the quiet realization that, despite the strategy and the discipline, the outcome remains stubbornly consistent with a version of yourself you thought you had outrun. You did not fail because of a lack of intelligence. You fail because the reality you inhabit is a precise, automatic response to a frequency you are emitting without even knowing its name. To chase is to declare that what you seek is elsewhere, creating a psychological distance that the laws of gravity cannot bridge. This inverted pursuit is the hidden trap of the modern world. Where the harder one runs, the faster the horizon retreats. Prosperity does not respond to the seeker. It settles toward a specific center of gravity, an internal position that makes the presence of abundance a structural necessity rather than a fortunate accident. What many call luck is simply the automatic reality clicking into place once the internal incoherence is removed. Your life has not been a series of random events, but a perfectly mirrored projection of an invisible field that precedes every thought and action you take. If the field is distorted, every seed planted will grow into a shape that reflects that original distortion, regardless of how much labor you provide. You are currently standing at the threshold of a 90-day recalibration, not because of the promise of change, but because the cost of remaining out of alignment has become mathematically unsustainable. To turn away now is to accept a repetitive loop of a signal that can only produce what you have already seen. The mechanism is active. It is indifferent to your belief, and it is already beginning to reorganize around the realization that the only thing standing between you and the hidden order of the world is the very state of being you are about to shed. O Geminides, the observation of human activity reveals a persistent and unsettling contradiction that most choose to ignore in favor of a more comfortable narrative of meritocracy. There exists a vast population of individuals who possess an exhausted command of their craft, who apply themselves with a discipline that borders on religious, and who sacrifice their vitality at the altar of industry. Yet they find themselves perpetually anchored to the same point of economic and personal stagnation. This is not a failure of strategy, nor is it a lack of what the world calls intelligence. It is a fundamental misinterpretation of the mechanics of achievement. They are playing a visible game while being governed by invisible rules, assuming that the force of their movement will eventually overcome the inertia of their reality. They do not realize that motion is not progress if the foundation upon which they stand is designed to absorb every ounce of their momentum without shifting a single millimeter. This silent friction is a hallmark of those who believe that wealth is a destination reached through a linear path of labor and time. They operate under the delusion that if they simply increase the volume of their effort, the external world will be forced to yield. However, the world does not yield to pressure. It responds to a state of being that precedes every action. When an individual pushes against the world from a position of perceived lack, the world simply pushes back with equal and opposite force, maintaining a perfect equilibrium of scarcity. It is a mechanical certainty. You cannot create a vacuum of abundance while your internal signature is broadcasting a loud, frantic message of deficiency. The harder the push, the more solidified the resistance becomes, creating a cycle of exhaustion that many mistake for the price of success when it is actually the cause of a profound internal incoherence. Consider the architect who builds a magnificent structure upon a shifting sandbank. No matter how precise the blueprints or how expensive the materials, the structural integrity is compromised from the first stone. In the same way, the actions of a person who is mentally misaligned are nothing more than decorative flourishes on a collapsing foundation. They study the habits of the wealthy and mimic their routines, hoping to catch the resonance of a frequency they do not actually inhabit. They are attempting to buy the result without possessing the cause. This creates a deep psychological fatigue, a sense of being an outsider looking through a glass wall at a reality that seems to function for others but remains cold and unresponsive to their own touch. It is a quiet realization that one has been running a race on a treadmill, where the scenery changes through a screen, but the feet never leave the same square carpet. The tragedy of the modern condition is a glorification of this useless struggle, where the grind is seen as a badge of honor rather than a symptom of a distorted internal field. We see individuals who have spent 10,000 hours perfecting a skill, yet they are surpassed by those who seem to possess a strange, effortless magnetism. This is not luck, and it is certainly not unfair. It is a natural operation of a mental gravity that most are too distracted to perceive. While the laborer is focused on the tool, the master is focused on the state of the hand that holds it. The laborer attempts to manipulate the object, while the master understands that the object is merely a shadow cast by the internal light. If the light is flickering and dim, no amount of polishing the shadow will make it appear bright. At some point, the question must be asked, why does the same opportunity result in a harvest for one and a drought for another? The variables of timing, education, and social standing are often cited. Yet history is littered with those who possessed every external advantage and still managed to manifest a life of quiet desperation. Conversely, there are those who emerge from a void with nothing but a specific, unshakable internal density that force the world to organize itself around them. This suggests that there is a silent order at work, a law that does not care for your intentions or your desperate need for change. It is a law of alignment, where the external reality acts as a high-fidelity mirror, reflecting not what you want, but what you are. The internal state is not a vague collection of thoughts or fleeting mood. It is a technical broadcast, a continuous signal that defines the boundaries of what is possible within your personal sphere of influence. This invisible field, often misinterpreted as a mystical aura, is actually the cumulative pressure of your core assumptions about your place in the hierarchy of existence. Most people carry a signal of pursuit, which is a vibration that inherently confirms the absence of the object. To pursue is to announce to the universe that you do not have. Because the law of reality is one of precise reflection, the universe responds by maintaining the state of pursuit, ensuring that the object remains exactly one step ahead. It is a chase designed by your own mental architecture, a game where the prize is always just beyond the next horizon, reinforcing the very lack you are trying to flee. This creates a paradox where the intensity of your desire actually becomes the greatest obstacle to its fulfillment. The more you want wealth, the more you emphasize its distance from your current position. This creates a mental tension that the world interprets as a command to keep wealth at a distance. It is like trying to catch a reflection in a pool of water by splashing at it. The more violent the movement, the more distorted the image becomes. The calm, unmoving center is the only state that allows a reflection to settle into clarity. Yet, the average person is terrified of this stillness, fearing that if they stop splashing, they will lose everything. They do not realize that it is the splashing itself that is preventing the reality they desire from manifesting. When we speak of a center of gravity, we are talking about a psychological mass that dictates what orbits around you. A person with a weak internal center is easily pulled into the orbits of others, becoming a satellite to their visions and their economies. They spend their lives reacting to the gravity of external events, fluctuating with the market, the news, and the opinions of their peers. Their reality is unstable because their internal position is fluid. In contrast, a person who has cultivated a dense, coherent internal state becomes a gravitational anchor. They do not seek opportunities. Opportunities are pulled into their field by a structural necessity. Wealth does not come to them in the traditional sense. It settles toward them because they have created a space where its absence will be a violation of natural law. This shift from pursuit to attraction requires a cold, unsentimental assessment of one's current broadcast. It is a realization that every no you have received from the world was actually a no. You were giving yourself through a fractured internal signal. The world was not being cruel. It was being honest. It was giving you a perfect readback of your own incoherence. If you are frustrated by the delay in your results, you must understand that the delay is not a test of your patience, but a measurement of the time it takes for you to finally stop arguing with the reality you are currently projecting. The friction you feel is a sound of your own resistance to the version of yourself that already possesses what you seek. Most lives are lived in a state of waiting for permission, where the individual believes that they must first see the result before they can adopt the state. They want the bank balance to prove they are wealthy, so they can finally feel secure. This is an inversion of the mechanical sequence. You cannot see the reflection before you stand in front of the mirror. Reality does not lead. It follows. It is a trailing indicator of an internal shift that has already occurred. To wait for the world to change before you change your internal position is to wait for a shadow to move while you stand perfectly still. It is a logical impossibility that keeps millions trapped in a perpetual state of almost, where success is always a future event that never arrives in the present. The concept of time in this equation is often the greatest source of misunderstanding. People believe they have lost years of their lives to failure, but in the realm of the invisible law, there's no such thing as lost time, only repeated cycles of the same state. You have not lived 10 years of struggle. You have lived 1 year of struggle 10 times. The clock is irrelevant to field. The field only cares about the quality of the signal being emitted now. A shift that takes place in a single moment of absolute coherence can collapse a decade of delay. However, this shift cannot be faked or manufactured through positive thinking. The reality of your life is far too sophisticated to be fooled by a surface layer thought. It responds only to the deep, tectonic movements of your core identity. We must look at the nature of this 90-day threshold not as a magical duration, but as a period required for the physical density of the world to reorganize around a new mental center. Just as a massive ship cannot turn in an instant, the momentum of your past misalignments takes time to dissipate. Most people abandon their new internal position just as the world is beginning to shift, mistaking the final echoes of their old reality for a failure of their new one. They see the old shadows and conclude that nothing has changed, return to their frantic splashing just as the water was about to settle. They fail to understand that the delay is a structural requirement, a buffering period where the old and the new exist in a state of overlap. The discomfort of this transition is where most are filtered out. To hold a new position while the old reality is still visible requires a level of internal authority that feels, to the uninitiated, like a form of madness. It is the ability to prioritize the invisible over the visible, to trust the law of gravity even when you are currently falling. This is not about faith in a religious sense. It is about a technical certainty in the functioning of a system. If you change the coordinates of the center, the circumference must follow. It is not a possibility. It is a geometric inevitability. But the mind, trained in the school of struggle, will scream that you are doing nothing, that you are wasting time, that you must do something to save yourself. Doing, when born from fear, is a destructive act. It is a form of interference that breaks the coherence of the signal. Most of what people call hard work is actually an attempt to compensate for a lack of internal alignment. It is a desperate effort to fix with the hands what has been broken in the mind. While action is a medium through which wealth is often delivered, it is not the source of the wealth itself. The action of a master is light, precise, and carries a sense of inevitability. The action of the misaligned is heavy, strained, and carries a sense of desperation. One is a harvest, the other is a hunt, and the world knows exactly which one is which. The recognition that your current life is a perfect manifestation of your past states of being should not be a source of guilt, but a source of immense power. It means that the mechanism is working perfectly. You have not been a victim of a chaotic universe. You have been the operator of a very precise machine that has been giving you exactly what you have asked for through your internal position. If the result is poverty or stagnation, it is because that is the only logical output for the input you provided. This realization is the beginning of the end of the wrong game. It is the moment the player realizes they have been playing against their own shadow, and that the only way to win is to change the stance of the body that casts it. The silent order does not negotiate. It does not care if you are a good person or if you deserve more. These are human moralities that have no place in the cold mechanics of mental gravity. The sun does not ask if a plant is worthy before it provides light. The light is provided to anything that exists within its field. Similarly, wealth does not ask about your character. It flows toward the path of least internal resistance. If your internal state is a maze of contradictions, doubts, and hidden beliefs in your own unworthiness, you have created a high-resistance path. The wealth will simply flow elsewhere toward a more coherent conductor. It is not a judgment. It is electricity following the path of the conductor. As the realization deepens, the individual begins to see that the secret was never hidden in a book or a technique, but was hidden in the very way they occupied their own skin. The way you walk, the way you breathe, and the silent assumptions you hold while standing in a room are all parts of the broadcast. You have been screaming your identity to the world in a language you didn't know you spoke, and the world has been answering you in kind. The people you meet, the offers you receive, and the accidents that befall you are all part of the conversation. There is no such thing as a private thought. Every thought is a public command to the invisible field that organizes your life. This leads us to the most uncomfortable perception of all, that you have never been denied anything by the world. You have only been given exactly what your internal state could accommodate. If you have been living on crumbs, it is because your internal container was only large enough to hold crumbs. To ask for more without expanding the container is a waste of breath. The container is expanded not through the acquisition of more knowledge, but through the shedding of the layers of incoherence that have kept it small. It is a process of subtraction, of removing the noise so the signal can finally be heard with absolute clarity. You are not learning to get wealth. You are learning to stop preventing it. The wealth is already a structural potential in the universe, waiting for a coherent center to settle around. Your task is not to build the wealth, but to build the center. This requires a level of honesty that most find unbearable, as it requires taking full responsibility for the lag and the blockages that defined your history. It was never the economy, the government, or your upbringing. It was always the field. And the field was and always will be a direct extension of your internal position. The spiral of consciousness now reaches a point where the old explanations for failure no longer hold any weight. You can no longer blame the external world once you have seen the gears behind the curtain. The discomfort you feel is the sensation of the old self dissolving, the realization that the life you thought you were living was merely a rehearsal for a performance you never quite started. You are standing at the edge of a fundamental reorganization, where the logic of effort is being replaced by the logic of being. The transition is not a transformation in the popular sense of the word. It is a restoration of a natural order that has been suppressed by years of artificial struggle. The ground is now prepared. The illusions of the hard way have been exposed for what they are, a sophisticated form of self-sabotage that allows the individual to feel productive while ensuring they never actually arrive. You are beginning to perceive the silent, unmoving center from which all true power originates. It is a position of absolute certainty, not because you know what will happen, but because you know that whatever happens must align with the gravity you have established. The world is no longer a place of threats and obstacles, but a canvas that is already beginning to take the shape of your newly coherent signature. There is no need for a conclusion, for the process has already begun, and the law is already in motion. The weight you carried was never the burden of the world, but the friction of a life lived out of alignment with its own core. You have moved through years as if navigating a labyrinth with a map drawn by those who never found the exit, mistaking the exhaustion of the journey for the necessity of the path. This realization does not come with a loud explosion, but as a quiet, heavy settling of dust. The moment you see that the rules you obeyed were merely the echoes of a frequency you have now outgrown. To return to the frantic motion of the seeker is no longer an option, for once the mechanism of the mirror is understood, the act of splashing the water reveals itself as a futile interruption of image. You are now entering the space where the inverted pursuit ends and the structural positioning begins. The frantic energy of wanting is being replaced by the dense, unmoving weight of having. A state that does not require proof because it is the proof itself. Wealth is no longer a distant shadow to be hunted through the thickets of effort, but a natural property of the ground upon which you stand. It is the difference between the wind that scatters the leaves and the mountain that dictates where the wind must flow. Your internal center has shifted, and with that shift, the circumference of your reality has already begun an inevitable reorganization. In this new clarity, The contrast between presence and absence becomes the only metric that matters. You see now that every moment spent in a fever of necessity was a moment of profound absence, a declaration that the source was elsewhere. By reclaiming your position at the center of your own field, you have ended the exile of your own prosperity. The world does not need to be conquered. It only needs to be allowed to settle into the patterns dictated by your coherence. The silence you now feel is not a void, but the sound of resistance falling away. The quiet hum of a machine that has finally found its rhythm after years of grinding its gears in the sand. Attempting to inhabit the old self will now generate a psychological friction that is impossible to ignore. The habits of struggle and the narratives of not enough will feel like a garment 3 sizes too small, constricting, uncomfortable, and fundamentally dishonest. This discomfort is your greatest ally, a biological alarm ensuring that you cannot drift back into the slumber of the misaligned. You have seen the invisible hand that organizes failure and success, and you can no longer pretend to be a victim of a chaotic environment. The 90-day cycle is not a countdown to a change, but the duration of your integration into a truth that has always been active. If this recognition feels like the return of a memory you never truly lost, it is because you are finally speaking the native language of the law. There is no need for a frantic rush to the finish line, for the finish line has moved to meet you where you sit. For those who feel the pull of this internal gravity and wish to see the full architecture of this silent formula, the path remains open to the continuation of this frequency. To stay within this field is to ensure that the reorganization of your life proceeds without interference. The door has been opened not from the outside, but from within, and the only coherent act is to step through and occupy the space that has been waiting for your signature. The mirror does not wait for you to believe. It simply reflects what stands before it.